I work at Bill Grady's all-night gas and shop off the Erehwon County Loop Road. For those unfamiliar with America's most isolated county, Erehwon is a largish island more than 100 miles out to sea from Baltimore. The Loop Road makes a circle around the island and connects most of the major towns. The station is located about halfway between Mudsark and Jerusalem. If you know the area, then you know how isolated it is, which is why I took the job. I always fancied trying my hand at writing a novel and working way out there with no civilization larger than a trailer park or a farmhouse for 15 miles in either direction. And well, long story short, that struck me as a good way to make some money while having free time to tackle this project. Despite that, I assure you this isn't fiction. I wish I was creative enough to make something this strange up. First things first, my name is David. It's not, but I'd rather stay anonymous. And I've only had this job for about 2 weeks. The last guy to hold the job was a kid who helped train me for 2 days, then shipped out. He was joining the Air Force, and I was hired really quickly to fill the vacuum he would be leaving. To my understanding, he kinda sprung it on the owner out of the blue. Anyway, he seemed kinda nervous those 2 nights, but I chalked it up to his being about to leave for basic training, and thought nothing of it. I had been there myself 1 week exactly, and had already fallen into a rhythm. The night shift only had a handful of customers, and I spent most of my time writing or smoking, at a safe distance from the pumps obviously. When this trucker came in, probably early 20s, pale-skinned and dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt with its sleeves rolled up, and a pack of cigarettes in one of the cuffs. The way you see in old war movies, if you need a visual aid. He looked around for a few minutes before walking up to the counter with a bottle of Coke and a pack of pork rinds. He stood looking over my shoulder at the rack of cigarettes and vapes behind me, checking for his brand, I assume, then asked for a pack of Lucky Strike 100s. He had this odd, kinda cold-sounding voice. That's not a good description, but it's the best I've got. It wasn't an accent really, just a cadence and tone that made me wonder if he was on something. I didn't care either way and rang him up. He paid cash and then he asked me a question. Do you know if Kelly's Diner is open this late? I had never heard of such a place and told him. He gave me a confused look before shrugging and walking out of the shop. If that had been the last of it, I'd have forgotten. But ever since I've been hearing more and more weird remarks about a town that I know doesn't exist. The second event came a day later when an old guy in a suit pulled up outside in an antique black car that I guessed to be from some time around World War II. Give or take probably 10 years on either side. I'm not really into cars. And he was wearing a suit to match. It was black and formal like you'd wear to a funeral and matched some old suits my granddad used to wear. He was visibly confused, and I wondered if he was senile, which seemed confirmed when he opened his mouth. He had this odd old-timey way of talking, and it stuck with me. He said, "Now I feel a right fool asking you, boy, but how do I get to Winewater Springs from here? I've gone and gotten my fool self lost, it seems." I'd never heard of the place, so I asked him some questions trying to get a handle on where it could be, or what it even was, as I wasn't sure if it was a town or a natural feature with that name. He told me it was a town, located along this stretch of highway between Mudsark and Jerusalem. He swore he must have missed the turnoff in the fog, but couldn't orient himself. I told him kindly that there was no such town, and asked if there was anyone I could call for him. But he just looked at me with a really odd expression before walking back out into the misty night air. I should have done something probably, but what? Call the sheriff's office and report an old guy said something strange? Nah, dude, not me. By the third time I was almost expecting it. This lady with big poofy hair came in wearing a bright pink jacket over fairly mundane clothes. She smiled widely, and in a voice I can only describe as ditzy, asked me how far she had to drive before coming to the turnoff for Winewater Springs. At this point I was starting to suspect a prank. I had lived on the island for my entire life, and knew exactly how many towns there were in the county. I knew all their names, and I knew someone from pretty much all of them. Like I said, Erehwon is a small place, and I knew for an abso-gold-plated freaking lootly certain fact that there was no such town. So I decided to play along with whatever prank or hazing ritual this was. I asked her the same sort of describe where it is questions I had asked the old man, and she was a little clearer than him in her answers. The conversation went like this. Me, do you know how far the turnoff is from Jerusalem? Her, like 20 miles? To be clear, that would place this town about 2 or 3 miles north of the gas station, in the middle of what I knew to be a cornfield. Me, is there a sign? Her, yeah, I mean there's that green sign next to the highway, and a wooden one closer to town. Me, how big is the town? Her, like, I don't know, about the size of Whisper Bay? For those unaware, that's the next town south of Jerusalem with about 2,000 people in it. Me, when was the last time you went there? Her, this morning, duh, I live there. The questioning continued like this for a few minutes, but didn't lead anywhere productive. I had neither been able to figure out where she was looking for, or get her to break character in whatever joke this was, so finally I told her I couldn't help her. And she left in a sulk. Just to prove I wasn't going crazy, I drove the entire length of the road between work and Mudsark the next day, slowly and going both directions looking for anything that might say Winewater Springs. Nothing, nada, zilch, not even the hint of a sign or road ever having been there, let alone existing today. The next night, nobody came in, asking about anything weird. Well, there was a weird dude, a priest with the robe and white collar wearing sunglasses inside, at night when it was overcast. But that guy is only memorable because he had a bad vibe, so to speak. Nothing he said was weird. So I thought maybe the joke, or whatever it was over. But the night after that, 2 people asked for help finding things I'd never heard of. One gave me the name of a hotel that I didn't know, and when asked said it was in Winewater Springs. I gave them directions to Gilman's bed and breakfast in Jerusalem instead. Saying I hadn't heard of what they were looking for, they thanked me and left. Then, not 20 minutes later, another guy walked in dressed wildly inappropriately for this time of year, wearing shorts and a t-shirt when it was cold and rainy, like always around here. He looked behind me at the rack of smokes and squinting, asked if we sold Diamond and Callaway brand cigarettes. I had never heard of that brand in my life, but just told him we didn't sell them. He shrugged and left, but I swear he muttered something about knowing the gas station in Winewater Springs had them as he left. I've also noticed that the radio in my car seems to get odd static sometimes, around where the supposed turn-off should be. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but it's all adding up to leave me really confused. There's a lot of creepy stuff on this island. We are cold, foggy, and isolated, and that breeds superstition and folklore. Ghost stories and cryptids are probably thicker on the ground here than anywhere else in the country. But I've asked around among my friends and nobody has ever heard a legend about a missing town or anything else that could explain this. If it's real, why can't I, or anyone else it seems, find the turnoff? And if, as I suspected, this is a prank, what's the punchline? Does anyone have any idea what I'm dealing with? It's starting to drive me crazy, and I know, this being the internet, people will mock me. Good. If there is a simple, logical explanation for this that will make me feel stupid with how plain it was, I'll be happy. That's what I want. A nice little tied up with a bow answer that makes me feel like an absolute idiot. Alright, I just got back from Winewater Springs. I've got a couple shots of bad vodka in me, and I think my nerves are steady enough to write this. But I know less about what is going on than I did before. I was driving to Port Erehwon on my day off to see a movie, and decided to take a weird route. North through Mudsark, then back south on back roads by Dutch Hollow. I did this for one reason, and one reason only. I won't disguise that fact. I was still hoping to find some evidence of a community just north of the gas station. I found it just at the end of the trees where the cornfields begin, curving back into the woods. The road was overgrown and looked more like a maintenance trail for a power line, but even still, I'm convinced it hadn't been there before. I've been driving this route my whole life. I would have noticed it, right? Maybe not. I don't know. I got out of my car to look around, and sure enough, there was a green turn-off sign next to it, face down in the ditch, covered in mud, mind you. But it existed, so I got back in my car and turned down the old trail. I knew there wasn't a town down here, but the sign had read, Winewater Springs. I think once I lifted it up, only about a third was legible. The path was so overgrown, and my car was far from an off-road vehicle that it took perhaps half an hour to go a mile down the track, but then the road started to improve, turning at first to clear dirt, then soon to gravel, and finally to asphalt. It appeared to be in better condition than most roads in the county, and I wondered what it was doing out here, unfinished. I didn't have long to wonder, however, as I soon reached a small parking lot. Beyond it, the hillside had been blasted away to a flat cliff, and two large metal doors were embedded in it. It looked like a hangar for an airplane, but there was no runway to provide an explanation. I parked at the entrance to the parking lot, in the middle of the road. Next to it was a sign made of carved, whitewashed wood that read, in a retro font, "Welcome to Winewater Springs," and below that in cursive the words, "A dandy place to live." The cheesy 1950s styling of the sign and the cold metal of the doors were at odds, and yet somehow complementary, like a sports car and a pickup both made by the same company. Some subtle quality remained that left them familiar to each other on first glance. Erehwon does have some old bunkers and forts. It's so far from anything worth nuking that it was considered for a continuity of government site, or so local legend goes, with explanations of why other places on the mainland had been chosen instead, ranging from locals not liking it to the water table being too high, and about a dozen other stories, changing with the teller and sometimes with the telling. Something you should understand about us out on this rock is that we have very little to do, so we have developed a strong tradition of storytelling and folklore. At least that's what I want to believe. Could just be that we're assholes who like scaring our girlfriends with ghost stories. Either way, I had heard stories about bunkers, even seen a few on school trips. There was one in Port Erehwon under the courthouse that we toured in the 7th grade. But I'm rambling because I don't really want to explain the rest of what happened. I got out of my car and slowly walked across the parking lot. The door looked like something from the 50s, but it also looked new. It was so clean and unrusted, unheard of on this rain-sodden island, that I expected a security guard to appear at any moment and ask me what I was doing. The door was hanging just slightly ajar, and no sound could be heard anywhere around. I didn't realize at the time, at least not with my head, but even the birds had fallen silent, I think. I peeked my head through the door and saw a tunnel sloping down with bright lights spilling up at the bottom. For some reason that I'm not entirely sure now, I felt I needed to go in. I think I did anyway, frankly. I'm not convinced I didn't hallucinate everything after I turned off that road. And I hope I did. Being crazy would be easier to rationalize than what I saw in there. My feet echoed on the smooth stone floor as I wandered down, the light growing brighter as I went. What I found at the bottom is, well, it's hard to describe. Not because it was so out of the ordinary you can't imagine it, but because of how weirdly normal, almost artificially so it was, except for its location. The best way I can describe the vibe of what I saw is to compare it to Main Street USA at Disney World, but even higher quality. The tunnel led out onto a street of paved blacktop, raised sidewalks next to it, with facades of brick and stone and wood on either side. It looked like the main street of any small town in America, idyllic but instantly familiar. Flags hung from light poles and bunting-lined windows as I slowly walked through the echoing cavern. Above me, the ceiling was rough stone, but painted a bright robin's egg blue with fluffy white clouds drawn on by some artist with a scaffold. The buildings themselves were as clean as if they had been built yesterday, but all had that subtle patina of age that makes old buildings special. The air smelled of nothing, not even the normal rock smell of a cave. As silently as though I were in church, I walked with slow footsteps to the sidewalk and then up to the window of a storefront. The text Main Street Drugstore was emblazoned across the glass, and looking through, I could see shelves of merchandise and a long bar counter running one side of the room. A sign hung over it advertising ice cream, 7 flavors, and a chalkboard behind the counter listed prices with nothing costing more than 20 cents. What was this place? I wondered at the time, though in hindsight, not as strongly as I should have. Across the street, I found a barber shop, its striped pole slowly spinning outside its door, trying the handle. I found it unlocked and stepped inside. It was a perfect recreation of a 1950s barber shop, as near as I could tell. Though I admit any inaccuracies would probably slip past me unnoticed if they were not too far out of pocket for the time period. I wandered back out into the street and followed it to an intersection, the tunnel splitting in a four-way cross. The buildings still lined every bit of their walls, ending at the stone roof of the cavern. Glancing around, I saw the left path narrow, slightly, with the roof lowering from 3 or 4 stories high to only about 1.5, perhaps 2 at the most. Slowly, I made my way that way and found houses, ranch styles, and a few split levels built like the Main Street buildings as facades into the sides of the rock. Walking into one, I found it furnished and clean, lacking any trace of dust or age, with a pantry still stocked and a refrigerator still cold. It was as if someone were already living here, and they probably were, I told myself with a shake. I had allowed the shock of finding this place to hypnotize me into a lack of judgment, but clearly, I had broken into someone's lived-in home, and they could be back any moment. More clearly now, I wondered what this place was. People clearly lived here, as some had come to my gas station, but where were they? Why build all of this and maintain it? Who had paid for it? These were all questions that seemed important to me in that moment. Walking faster now, but still trying to be quiet, I walked back towards the intersection. I reached it in about half the time it had taken me to find the house, and I was just turning to leave when I heard a faint sound from a brick building farther up the street, away from where I had come in. It may sound insane. Hell, it does sound insane. But if you are judging me, so am I. Believe it. I felt at that instant that I needed to find the source of the sound. I realized then that other than footsteps and my own breathing, that faint noise, was it music? It was the only thing I had heard since turning off my car. As I got closer, it was clear to me that it was indeed music. The sounds of children singing the national anthem were drifting from what I saw now was a 2-story brick schoolhouse. The words "Memorial School" are carved above the door. As I stepped through its front door, the sound of singing grew louder, and for the first time since entering this weird simulacrum of the 1950s, I smelled something. A faint, acrid chemical tang that I could not place, only noticeable because of how little smell anything else in this place had. I followed the sound up the stairs. They creaked faintly underneath my feet, but I kept going. When I reached the door to a classroom labeled 207, I could tell that the sound was coming from just on the other side, and slowly I reached out to turn the handle. It was unlocked as all the other doors had been, and swung open with a faint creak. Inside was an empty room. Fear and disappointment rushed through me in equal measure as I stared around the room, looking for the source of the singing. A fairly typical classroom. Posters depicting things relevant to the subjects at hand lined the walls, and colorful paper shapes like stars and snowflakes were tacked to the walls. I slowly scanned the room, turning in a circle, and finally, I found it, the source of the noise. A lone record player sat on the teacher's desk, spinning as it belted out the final lines of the anthem. The childlike voices, already not great singers, rendered ethereal by the scratchy recording. Slowly I reached out with my hand to raise the needle from the record and restore the funeral-esque silence of this place. But the instant my fingers lifted the arm from the vinyl, everything was engulfed in a pure, unpierced darkness. For a moment I was in panic. Underground, as I was, it was not only dark, it was fully and truly lacking in light. Not darkness, but blindness. And my other senses were already compensating. I could hear the faint creaking of the building, smell that same chemical smell stronger now, and mixed with the smells of mold and damp. Then my senses started to return to me, and I fished my phone from my pocket, turning on its flashlight setting. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I screamed with terror. The light had played across the desks as I turned it on, but they were no longer devoid of students. The room had changed, paint peeled from the walls, and the posters were yellowed and curled by moisture. But I didn't notice any of that, though I remember it now, so some part of me must have logged it. All I could see was the children's skeletal remains propped in each of the chairs, partially mummified and seeming to watch me with their dead, empty eyes. Bodies twisted oddly with hands over mouths and heads under tables. I backed up, breathing heavily until my legs collided with the teacher's desk, and spinning in fear, I saw him too, frozen forever, as if grabbing at his throat. His empty, rotted eyes stared questioningly into my soul, asking why I had dared disturb his rest. And I ran, headlong down the stairs, light flashing around wildly and out onto the street. More were dead on the street, twisted or captured in the midst of some last heroic act, a mother forever mummified over the corpse of her baby, and a policeman holding a little girl as she died, himself following her by mere moments. All these signs and more were implied by the poses I saw, but I didn't care for their story, only for my escape. I ran, feet slamming into the ground like jackhammers as I reached the end of the town. Here the road curved back up to the surface. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, and playing the light around the space, saw something I had missed before. Above the exit tunnel, in faded and peeling paint, was a faint, grinning, yellow smiley face. "Have a nice day," forever left underneath, its unblinking eyes a silent witness to whatever unknown horror had happened here. And then I was off again, running up the sloping path and out through the crack in the doors. My legs were burning, but I shot across the parking lot and threw myself into my car. But something was wrong. I hadn't run across a parking lot. I had run across grass, dotted with low shrubs, and my car, where I had parked it beside the wooden sign on the access road, was now sitting on a simple dirt track, overgrown and hard to see as it snaked into the woods. I stared in disbelief at the hillside where the doors had been, and saw only stone, blasted clearly at some point far in the past, eroded back to something almost natural. But that was all, no entrance tunnel or cave. This place had the look of an abandoned construction site now. There were signs of rock having been blasted and not cleared. Some rusted things that might have been equipment lay strewn about this empty lot. But nothing remained of the town that I had just left, and its scene, of its mass death and massacre. I somehow made it home, though I don't remember much about that trip, just that it was getting dark by the time I made it to the road an hour later. I checked my watch, and saw that somehow I had spent 12 hours in that place, if it ever even existed at all. One last thing to note, I went back the next day. You can call me an idiot all you want, but I need answers. I didn't get any. It was still nothing more than a long-abandoned construction site. I post this here both as a record of what I saw and as a cry for help. Please, if anyone has any idea what I saw, please let me know. And a word from the wise, if you start hearing people talking about somewhere that doesn't exist, just ignore them.